Hello everyone. Today we're talking about the Roland boutiques. There's been a lot of criticism on the synths as they are not analog, they are digital, and that they are too small to actually use and see. But I'm going to show you in a video how to adjust these and use them at their full efficiency. These are the two synths we're going to be using as an example today is the Roland JX03 and the JPO8, which is the Jupiter 8 recreation. And the JX did not come with the front panel controls, so this is a much improved JX over the original. The JP is about the same. It's missing some of the performance controls, but you can't have everything, I guess, for $300. But what you end up getting is a iconic Jupiter synth for $300. And if you want the full 8 voices, it would cost you $600. So for $600, you get a full 8-voice recreation of the JPO8. And you might say, well, what do I want with a vintage digital synthesizer? Well, I didn't really care whether I didn't really care whether I had a JPO8 or not. All I cared about was these are two great sounding synthesizers in their own right, all by themselves. I don't care if they're trying to emulate something or not. The Jupiter has got some cross modulation and some really great features on it, and it's always been a great synth for designing. All the controls are there right in front of you, and we're going to get to how to use those controls in their small form factor. And the same way with the JX03. The JX03 now, when it originally came out, did not have these controllers on it. And right now we have a very controllable JX. Now the JX I didn't even really know about. It's far less known, I think, as an iconic synthesizer, but this has turned out to be an excellent sounding synth with huge amounts of bottom end to it. If you go back and listen to some of my synth jams where I'm using the JX, you're going to hear a really great sounding digital synth that I think anybody's going to have trouble finding a difference between that and the original analog, other than I don't have any noise, and these newer ones are all cleaned up as far as noise. They're very good sounding synths, and I couldn't be happier. So for $500, I now have a Jupiter 8 and a JX synth that I can use together as a 4 oscillator synth. I was planning to get the Juno, but that one went out of production. These are kind of short run, so I hope to find a Juno still and add that as my third boutique. I was going to use all 3 of those together as a 5 oscillator synth. Now, what I found out though is the JX has got such great bottom end; it stands on its own just wonderfully. And I'm still learning on the Jupiter how to make this one shine too. But we are talking 2 excellent synthesizers for $500. In other words, for the price of a Casio toy, we're getting a full-blown synthesizer with absolutely wonderful sound. And that's why I still keep buying digital today. There's nothing out there that I'm going to find like this JX03. There's nothing out there that I'm going to find that sounds like this for $200. Nothing. Not analog, not digital, nothing. These are full-blown synths. These aren't abbreviated synths like the Volca series. This is a 2 oscillator, full ADSR, full control over filters. Plus we got presets, and we have a place to store. Plus, of course, all these boutiques are coming with their own step sequencer too, if you want to use it. So just to remind everybody, I started off way back in the 60s on a Lowry organ. That was my first keyboard. But it took some 20 years before I could actually, once I got out on my own when I was 18 years old. It took some 20 years before I could finally afford my own first keyboards. And here's a picture of some of my first ones. The Juno 2 was the first keyboard I bought. It was about $1,000 back there in the late 80s. And if you look at it, you'll say, well, there's not a lot of controls on the front of that. And there wasn't. We're talking huge amounts of menu diving with just a tiny little display. It was so not much fun to program that I rarely programmed it. So the next synth I bought above that is the Roland U220, which was one of the first PCM available synthesizers. And this one was great. I mean, I finally had a beautiful sounding piano, at least beautiful sounding back in the early or late 80s, early 90s. That U220 came with a great piano. But again, a 2-line LCD display, any kind of editing, any kind of editing was a nightmare. And then below all of it was the next synth I bought, and that was a sampler synth, the old Ensoniq EPS 16 Plus, which is Ensoniq's best effort and last effort, I think, at building hardware samplers. And again, even though we had more display lines, it was again menu diving. Now the trouble with the menu diving is when you're designing a tone on a synthesizer, and for example, let's just use, we're trying to apply an LFO to the filter. So we've done some low pass filter work, a little bit of resonant work. Now we have to, with a menu, you'd have to come out of the filter, find the LFO menu, get into that, adjust that a little bit, and you go, oh, that's pretty good, but I need to change the resonance a little bit to make this work. So back out of that menu, back finding the filter menu, and back finding the resonant, and then you change that a little bit. Oh, and then you go, oh, that's almost right. Just need a little change. I think I need to change my sine wave LFO to a triangle wave. So back out of the filter, go back and find the LFO page, and finally adjust that. It's that back and forth that we have on these menu diving synths that make it 10 times longer and 10 times more frustrating to program. Compare that to the upfront controls on these boutiques, and what we have is not only a synthesizer that costs $200 or $300, where I was paying back in the 80s almost $800. I think I paid almost $800 or over $800 for that little U220 module. I think I paid about $1,100 or so for the Juno, and that EPS 16, that thing was probably up around $2,000. So I think we need to look back at what we used to have before we start criticizing what we have today, because today is a boom in synthesizers. For any keyboardist out there who is a sound designer and loves synthesizers, you got to be loving what we got today. So let's move on to the moving video. I'm going to show you how to use these smaller controls just as effectively as the larger controls. I'm a 6 foot tall, 195 pound man that with large hands who is having absolutely no problem programming these boutiques. I'm also 60 years old, and my eyesight certainly isn't what it used to be, yet I'm still having no problem. The advantage to these small boutiques are you actually can get closer to them than you could like the Roland. I have a Roland Gaia, which of course you don't have to get that close to it to see what you're doing. But with these ones where you get closer to what you're doing, actually they fill up your peripheral vision and you can really just get in there tight and start controlling it. So the biggest complaint, and the only one I agree with, is the shiny tops to these knobs kind of hide the white indicator line of where the knob is sitting. And that's my only complaint, and that's what I agree with everybody else. But the flat black and the bright white printing, I have no problem seeing. And the sliders is the next criticism. And the sliders, I have no problem. The only thing you need with a slider to control it is it has to have the right amount of resistance. It can't have too much where the slider moves the actual module around on the table, and it can't be too little that it feels loose. And it has to be consistent throughout the entire length of the slide. And that's what we're getting with these Roland products. We're getting a absolutely beautifully designed slider that is consistent throughout the entire length, has exactly the right amount of resistance on it to work. And now let's move on to the moving video where I show you how to adjust these sliders actually more accurately than you can actually adjust a knob. And any size finger works. So let's get to the quick little short tutorial on how to use these sliders, and you'll be designing and enjoying your Roland boutiques to the maximum. And if you've held off on buying these because of the criticism of how small these are and how hard they are to work with, I don't see it at all. These, like I said, let's go back and look at what we used to have. We used to have a couple of LCD lines and a couple of buttons to push, and out of that we were supposed to program. Now that is a nightmare. That doesn't work. That really doesn't work. Today we've got so much better equipment. So let's get to the moving video and the tutorial on how to use these sliders. Let's take a look at these faders. And people are trying to move these faders around with their fingers like that. That's what you do for the long control. If you want to get it close, you go okay, and then drop it down below that sweet spot you're looking for. And then you're going to put your finger in front of the fader, and all you're going to do is roll your finger a little bit. And that fader is going to move extremely small amounts. Very small. It's actually easier to get a small amount there than it is to rotate a knob. Let me show you that on the Gaia. Okay, here we are on the Gaia. Now this has big controls, and nobody's really complained about it other than people complain that the sliders don't have sweet spots. It's too hard to get a sweet spot because they jump around too much. But again, I'm going to put my finger right. What I do is I find the sweet spot, and then I go below it. Okay, I'm out of the sweet spot. Now I just put my finger behind it. See if I can get this on the camera. I put my finger behind it, press down on the keyboard for stability, and now I'm going to just roll my fingers slightly forward. And I don't even know if you can see that fader moving, but it is moving in just micro inches at a time. Between pressing down on the keyboard for stability and being able to just roll across your finger, you can get incredible detail. Now I don't have a problem that much with the rotating pots. That is still a great way of dialing in detail. But I can actually get more detail on this and even the little sliders of the Jupiter 8 or JPO 8 by planting my finger behind the slider and just rolling my fingertip up a little bit. And that's all it takes to fine-tune those sweet spots. So I'm not sure if anybody understands this technique, because there's really nothing to complain about with the sliders, unless, and this is the biggie, the sliders have to have the right amount of resistance to make this work, and it has to be consistent resistance across the entire range. So they can't be too stiff, they can't be too loose, and they have to be consistent throughout. Now, how did Roland do on that? Absolutely beautiful. Each one, whether it's the little boutique sliders or the Gaias, each one has absolutely perfect weight behind them, perfect resistance, not too heavy, not too light, and absolute perfect resistance across the entire range of the slider. And that's how you fine-tune the Roland Gaia and the Roland Boutique series.